Hello, chess fans. Welcome to another edition of Chess Chat, a program designed to give you, the viewer, a better understanding and an appreciation of the exciting world of chess. I am your host, George Marajanian, Program Director of the Wachusett Chess Club at Fitchburg State College. This club meets every Wednesday evening from 7 to 11 on the first floor of the McKay Campus School at the college. And with me is once again my trusty co-host and longtime colleague, Martin Lane of Lunenburg, one of the strongest and most active chess players in north central Massachusetts. Welcome, Marty.
Hello, George.
Well, Marty, today we are going to focus our attention on one of the greatest chess players in the history of the game. And we've done a show on this individual in the past, in the years ago, but we're doing a show on him today because we're commemorating this year the 80th anniversary of his birth and also the 25th anniversary of his death. His name, Tigran Petrosian.
Right.
And he's known to many English-speaking chess players as Tigran Petrosian.
Right.
Tigran Petrosian was the 9th official world champion, and he reigned from 1963. Here's some photo of Tigran from the 60s. He is a very imposing individual, very nice eyebrow there. Look at that look of him, as he almost looked with disdain, at the board with a demonstration board of the background. So there are numerous photos that are available online. Here's another good photo of Petrosian in front of the pieces. And here's a very young photo of Petrosian. I would say he's maybe a teenager, in late teens. Right. Or early 20s.
Maybe.
Yeah. And again, he was born actually in Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, the country of Georgia. He spent his formative years there. He grew up in Tbilisi. And then in 1946, when he was like 16 or 17, he moved to Armenia, Yerevan, Armenia, the capital, and only spent 3 years in Armenia. But he was born of Armenian parents. He learned checkers and backgammon from his parents at the age of 4. He later said those games actually were good preparation for the game of chess. And he didn't really take up chess until the age of 8. But he really got involved in chess, very active, with his teens, in his mid-teens. And he eventually, after his parents died, he was only 16 when his parents died, he moved to Yerevan, spent 3 years there, and then found out if he wanted an opportunity to improve at chess, he had to move to a chess city. And one of the 3 great chess cities in Russia, or the Soviet Union then, was either Moscow, Leningrad, or Kiev in Ukraine. So he picked Moscow and he lived there, and he died there tragically in August 1984 at the age of 55 he died of stomach cancer. Now we're going to present a game today, Marty, that Petrosian played in May 1962 in one of the strongest chess tournaments ever. It was played in Curacao in the Netherlands Antilles, and it was called a candidates tournament. These were players who were called candidates who were in line for the world championship. Whoever won this tournament would be challenging the reigning world champion, who was Mikhail Botvinnik. Right. But Petrosian did it. He did it in this tournament, and we're going to present a game against a world champion. In fact, his opponent in this game
was a former world champion.
Yes. What do you know? This is Mikhail Tal.
Mikhail Tal.
What do you know about Mikhail Tal?
Well, Mikhail Tal was he Latvian?
He was Latvian.
Right?
Sure.
He was Latvian, part of that whole Soviet system at the time.
Right.
And he had defeated Botvinnik earlier to be world champion, and then Botvinnik took his title back in a rematch.
Right.
And so at this point in 1962, Botvinnik was the reigning world champion. And this tournament in Curacao really pitted the world's top players at the time. We had Tal and Petrosian and Fischer.
Bobby Fischer from the United States.
Geller.
Who was from Ukrainian.
Palbenko.
Palbenko from the United States. But he actually grew up in Hungary. But he was American.
Viktor Korchnoi.
Korchnoi from Russia.
And the other player,
Miroslav Filip, Czechoslovakia.
Right.
And Bobby Fischer, who played in that event, he considered them all Russians. He says, I intend to beat these Russians. And when someone pointed him out to, says, well, wait a minute, Petrosian is Armenian, Geller is Ukrainian, Tal is Latvian. What do you mean Russians? We have all these ethnic groups, but he considered them all Russians, and he was out to beat them.
Right. And one of the things that Petrosian said about this tournament, looking over the field,
Yes.
he said the winner will be the player who does not lose, as opposed to saying, you know,
Yes.
the person who wins the most. No, it's the person who is going to not lose.
He said that.
Right. And, you know, Petrosian's style, I think we talked about it in the earlier program, was a very defensive, he was known for his defensive play, his positional play.
Right.
Very quiet, kind of gradual play. He's been compared as a crocodile who waits his time and then attacks. His opponent in the game that we're going to talk about, Mikhail Tal, was the antithesis.
Right.
Sparkling attacks, huge, you know, known for his tactical play, sparkling tactical play. So we have these two opposing philosophies, really, of chess, and yet it's Petrosian who uses tactics to beat Tal really at his own style.
Yeah, and this is why I think we're going to present this game to, I think it's going to impress our viewers of the fact that Petrosian adopted tactics to defeat, you know, the master tactician, Mikhail Tal.
Right. Now, sometimes Petrosian had been criticized for this kind of defensive play.
Yeah.
And there was this, he was featured in the Finnish chess magazine, Suomen Shakki. There's a piece about, a two-part piece about Petrosian. And in it, Petrosian is quoted as saying, "I know that there are people who criticize me for my defensive play."
Yes.
He says, but they don't understand the situation. He says that if you want to rely on luck and fortune, then play cards or roulette.
Right.
When it comes to chess, it's an entirely different question. And that was his position. He says, I don't believe in taking unnecessary risks.
No, he was not a risk taker.
And Tal, in talking about Petrosian, said he had the technique of Capablanca, which is the early 20th century champion that we did a program on. He had the technique of a Capablanca and the defensive instincts of a Karl Schlechter. Schlechter was a 19th century player who was known for never losing. Didn't win as much, but he drew all the time.
Yes. Well, Petrosian had that reputation. He was considered probably one of the hardest players to beat.
Right.
You know. And Fischer, said that Petrosian is probably one of my most difficult opponents he's faced. In fact, Petrosian, when he died, left his legacy. He left with a plus record against Fischer.
Right.
They played 32 times. Petrosian won 9 times. Fischer won 8 times, and there were 15 draws.
Right.
Yeah.
Fischer is quoted in the same article as saying Petrosian saw threats in his opponent. Saw threats in his opponent's position long before his opponent did.
Yes. Okay. So, he was a phenomenal player. And again, he reigned from 1963 until 1969. And in 1969, the player who defeated him was Boris Spassky. And Boris Spassky went on to lose to Bobby Fischer in 1972 in Reykjavik, Iceland. So we have some of the greatest players, in the world that we have discussed. Today we're going to do Petrosian. And there's another reason why we're doing Petrosian. The Wachusett Chess Club just concluded its Tigran Petrosian Memorial, which you, Marty, and our assistant in the control room, Bruce Felton, you two tied for first in that event. You drew each other in the tournament. In honor, in the memory of Petrosian, you've shared honors in this year's Tigran Petrosian Memorial. So I wanted our viewers to know that we held a memorial tournament to honor the Petrosian memory. But let's get to the game.
Okay.
In this game, Tal is white, and how does he open up the game here?
He opens up with the pawn on e2 to e4. We've talked about this a lot. It occupies a center square and opens up 2 critical diagonals, one for the bishop and one for the queen.
Okay. Well, Petrosian, now in response, could have played e5, could put pawn to e5, but he chose e6, playing the pawn from e7 to e6.
Right.
Now, does this actually have a name? Chess, all these openings and defenses have names.
Right. Well, with this first move, it's now called the French defense.
And you know why it's called the French defense?
Well, I think it was first proposed by a French player back in the 1700s, Philidor. I forget his first name. Was it
André Danican Philidor. And it was taken up by his countrymen.
Except Philidor himself never played it.
Never played it, right, yes. But Philidor, it was a team of players from Paris.
Right, London and Paris. Right.
And they played a correspondence match in 1834. And the Parisians played this move against the Londoners,
Right.
And did it successfully, and the name caught on. They started calling this the French defense. All right, so it's Tal's second move. What did he play against this?
Because black hasn't occupied one of the central squares, white in this position generally goes right ahead and, well, he's going to move his d2 pawn to d4 and put both of his central pawns and centralize them in the, in the center part of the board, opening up another important diagonal, this time for the dark squared bishop.
So it's always good if your opponent gives you the opportunity to put two central pawns in play. I mean, then do it.
Well, the game rotates around the control of the center.
It's a fight over the center.
Right.
Okay. What Petrosian did in response to this is play d5. The pawn on d7, he plays it to d5. This pawn actually now, in turn, is now attacking this pawn, undefended pawn on e4. All right, so it's Tal's third move.
Well, so the pawn is undefeated. White has a couple of choices. He can choose to exchange the pawn if he wishes.
Which was played by the way, in the correspondence match between Paris and London. That's what the Parisians did.
Right.
But what other alternatives do we have?
And this leads to a quiet position, sort of drawish position.
Okay. Well, actually, that simplifies things. I mean, doesn't present any challenge for black.
He could advance the pawn, moving, really sort of lock up the center part of the board. He can develop the knight to c3, which is actually what happens in the game.
And it also defends the pawn on e4.
And defends the pawn. One thing that did not happen in this game, if white plays the knight to c3, black can bring his bishop out, pinning.
So this would allow the bishop to b4, b4 square, pinning the knight.
Renewing the threat.
So can we avoid that? Can we defend this pawn on e4 without having that pin?
Right. He can play the knight to d2, known as the Tarrasch variation.
Yeah.
And in this case, now the pin doesn't work.
Now the bishop to b4 has no
because you can just chase it away.
Right, attack with c3, and now the bishop has to move and has to retreat. So nothing is gained by that. All right. So what Tal played in the game, you said
on White's third move, he plays knight to c3, which is one of the choices, defending the pawn.
Okay. Now Petrosian could have played the bishop on f8 to b4, pinning the knight, but he chose to play the knight on g8 to f6. So knight f6. He's now attacking this pawn on e4 twice.
And so,
all right.
And here again, White has the option. The choice is to advance that pawn and push the knight, usually to d7.
That would actually force the knight to retreat. No doubt d7 would be, but certainly better than going back to its original square.
Right, and that being the only other.
And this is a good. E5 is a very good move.
It's actually more common, I think. Than,
all right, but he didn't play that.
No, he didn't play that.
All right, so what did he do instead?
By way of defending this pawn, because it is attacked twice, he pins now the bishop, the knight on f6 with the bishop to g5. As his fourth move.
Okay, and also in the process is now threatening to advance the pawn.
Winning the pawn.
Yes, right. It would be very dangerous. So what Petrosian did in response, he captured the d pawn on d5, d captures on e4.
Removes that
Removes the threat. Okay.
And
Tal
recaptures, knight take the pawn on e4, and this becomes now a variation of what's known as the Rubinstein variation.
Okay, there was a very famous player, Akiba Rubinstein, who actually developed and popularized this variation. Okay, now, so we have a double attack on the knight, but of course the knight is protected twice, the queen and the g-pawn are protected. Now Petrosian could have, in this position, just brought the bishop to e7 and protected that.
Unpinning actually threatening this
Yes,
knight.
actually that would be a threat, yes. So, but instead of doing that, instead of playing the bishop to e7, he chose to defend that knight by playing the knight on b8 to d7. So that's his move, knight b d7. So it's now Tal's move.
Right, and so as his sixth move, he decides. I guess there are a few choices. I mean, he could develop another. He needs to do something about the knight. He needs to protect it. I suppose he could play bishop to d3.
Bishop
d3.
D3.
But what he chooses to do is to exchange. On his sixth move, he plays knight take f6 check.
Okay, and now Petrosian has to recapture. And he certainly is not going to capture with the g-pawn. If we have a position, look at the position. This is totally unnecessary to capture here. It does attack the bishop, but it's going to weaken this castle, this position where black would like the castle and be safe. So instead, in this position, what black does is simply capture. Knight takes f6. That's That's basically the forced move. You know.
And so now, looking at the board, both sides really need to develop their pieces. They only have one piece out
Right.
a piece, and so Tal makes a developing move. He plays the knight on G1 to F3, brings the knight out, centralizes it, gives a little bit of extra support to both the pawn and the bishop.
Okay. Now in this position, Petrosian has choices. That's what you have in chess. You have alternatives. What he could have done, if we look at the board closely, he could have played the bishop to E7 and followed with castling, put the king in a safe place. But instead of playing bishop E7, which is certainly a logical reply, he chose to play C5. The pawn on C7 plays up to C5, attacks the pawn on D4.
Right. And white, in turn, has choices.
Right.
And this is actually, what we think of as a critical position, where a lot of games have reached this position, and then players have tried a number of different approaches.
Yes.
One approach would be to capture the pawn. It's not really capturing it, because black can recapture with the bishop. It's threatening queen take, queen check, and forcing taking the right to castle away from the king.
Right. This would actually give black that would give black lots of choices here.
Right.
Because black actually in turn could take, queen takes on D1, check, forcing the rook to take. Or the queen could come out to A5, instead check. And on the block, certainly the block to check, this queen could pick off this pawn on C5.
Right.
But of course, and also leave this knight possibly being taken to double the pawns here.
Fine.
Well,
but
again,
that's one approach.
That's one possibility. All right, but what was
the other thing is to develop the white squared bishop, and the main choices would be to go all the way to B5, bishop to B5.
All right, what would happen on this check now? This is interesting. All right, so he has to block this check. He's not going to certainly move the king, and forfeit castling. So, the only move he has is bishop D7. All right, so if he did this, bishop D7, how would white continue?
Well, again, a couple of tricks. He could take the bishop on F6, and if he retakes with the queen, then he can play bishop take D7, again, forcing the king to take, and then pawn take with check.
But what if instead of taking here first, what if he took bishop takes D7, check, forcing the queen to take back, okay, and now what do we gain here?
Well, he could come up with a knight, a nice strong spot.
But this would this allow the?
Oh, that would allow.
But actually, would it be actually better for white to play queen E2 first, so that we can threaten the castle queen side and have a rook on this D1 square?
That would be stronger.
That would be worth actually giving up a pawn for that. Okay, so here's the position.
Now, in that same tournament, Tal made another move. He played the bishop to C4 against Benko in this same tournament. He played bishop to C4, and this turns out to be one of the main lines here.
All right, so this is considered a major continuation with the idea of castling king side.
Castling king side, he's on a strong
So in this game against Petrosian,
he played
Tal didn't play this?
No, he played something that turned out to be not so good. He plays queen to D3.
All right. Well, this looks dubious. I mean, blocking, actually limiting the scope of that light squared bishop.
It does open up the possibility of castling queenside.
Okay. Well, what Petrosian does in response to this, he plays bishop E7. He comes out here. He has another defender on the knight at F6. Okay.
And then there's a move that's a little puzzling. White's ninth move.
Yes.
When he could castle queenside, or
seems reasonable castle queenside.
That seemed to be why he did that. He suddenly decides he's going to play bishop take the knight on F6.
Wow. Well, this allows Petrosian now to respond with bishop takes F6.
Attacking this pawn.
And we've got a triple attack on this pawn. We've got the bishop, the pawn, and the queen attacking the pawn on D4, which is only defended twice.
Yeah.
All right. So what does Tal do here? I mean, he could castle. Castling would actually would bring the rook over and have a third defender, but he chose something else.
Yeah, he plays queen to bishop 5, check.
Okay. All right. So now we have to block this check. Okay. So what Petrosian does here, now he certainly doesn't want to bring the queen. If he brought the queen up, if he brought the queen to block,
well, then he could play queen take pawn.
Yeah, actually, actually white would win a pawn, right? This
would actually either take queen take pawn or pawn take pawn, either way.
That's true, because the queen is protected by the. So this would win a pawn, This is with a pawn for white.
Right.
So nothing is gained by offering the exchange of queens here, because the c pawn would be lost. So what he does, he has to play bishop d7, which he did. That was his 10th move. And now it's Tal's 11th move coming up. What does he do here? His queen is under attack?
He could take the c pawn, but then
let's see. Let's show that. Let's show that. What if he had taken the pawn on c5?
If he takes with the queen,
okay, so now
that creates a lot of problems.
Here's the problem with that.
Yeah, he can.
Rook on a8 goes to c8, attacks the queen.
The queen has
Where's
to go
the queen going?
Well, the queen can't go there, can't go there.
No, but it can take this pawn.
It can take the pawn.
Okay,
so he does that.
But once that pawn is gone, it allows black in turn to capture. Rook takes c2, capture this pawn, and threaten this pawn.
Right. So it gets messy.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is not recommended to take. Where are we now here? There's a pawn here and the pawn here. Okay,
right. So the queen's threatened.
So the queen is threatened. The queen has to move.
So he takes the pawn on b7. Queen take pawn on b7.
Okay, all right. So now what Petrosian does? He brings his rook on a8 to b8, attacks the queen.
Right.
Our queen has to move. Where does it go?
Well, he takes the a pawn. Queen take pawn. He doesn't have too many choices either, so he has to.
Okay, so Tal is picking off pawns here.
Right.
Doesn't realize that he's allowing black some very aggressive counterplay. So what Petrosian does here, he's playing rook takes b2.
Well, he's going to recapture one.
Right. He captures, and now he's threatening this pawn on c2.
Right.
All right. So what does Tal do in response to this?
Okay. So what he does, this pawn is threatened.
Right.
And so as is the other, so he can only defend one of them.
Right.
So he plays bishop to d3, which develops the bishop and makes for the possibility of castling.
So he wants to get his king into a safe place as fast as possible.
Right.
I mean, he's see how he's delayed it? Because both sides have delayed castling.
Right.
All right, so what Petrosian did here, the pawn on c5, he captures the pawn on d4.
Right.
C takes d4 is his move.
Right.
All right, so what does Tal do now?
Tal castles. I think he's sensing that he's in trouble and he needs to get his king into safety.
All right. So Petrosian, in response to this, instead of castling, he could have castled here, but he's got a better move. He plays bishop c6. Now, what does this bishop do? Is this on a nice diagonal?
Right. Well, for one, yes. I mean, he can, if he takes the knight, he opens up.
He would actually, by taking this knight, threatening to take this, he would actually double these pawns, weaken this castle position. Right. Remember, anytime pawns are doubled on a castle position, it weakens that castle position. All right, so bishop c6 is Petrosian's move. What does Tal do here?
He comes back and he's going to threaten the rook on a2. He's going to play queen to a3.
Okay.
That's the 15th move, and threatening the rook.
And I see two things he's doing. Not only is he threatening the undefended rook, but he's also preventing castling.
Right.
He controls this diagonal from a3 to f8, so black's rook is under attack.
Right.
Okay. So what Petrosian does here, he plays queen to b6. The queen comes here, defends the rook. It also stops any possibility of white trying to trade off, putting another rook on the file. Petrosian controls the B file. There's nothing that can be on the file.
Right.
Yeah. Total domination.
Now there's a threat that white has to deal with.
Yes.
And that is that the queen. One of the dangers of bringing queens out, like as Tal did, is you have to be careful it doesn't get trapped. If black were to play bishop to e7, the queen would have nowhere to go.
So he's threatening the trap. With this queen b6, he's threatening on the next move to play bishop e7, winning the queen.
Winning the queen.
All right, so how does Tal stop that?
Well, he has to do two things. He does two things. He plays bishop to c4, which gives the queen an escape square to d3.
Okay.
And it also has a threat that if he brings this bishop back, now the rook is trapped.
Okay, it's
a two-edged move.
All right, so now, but that does give the queen now an escape square. All right, so what Petrosian does after this, after bishop c4, he sees now, yes, that this, so what he does, he comes here, rook b4.
Threatening the bishop.
Threatening the bishop. Right. He attacks the bishop.
So the queen has to defend the bishop, goes to the only safe square she's got.
Okay,
plays queen to d3.
Okay, so Petrosian says, okay, well now I think it's time for me to castle. It took him 17 moves, but he finally castles, puts his king into a safe place, as if it needed a safe place, but it does. But now he's able to, if he needs, to bring this other rook into play. All right, so now it's Tal's 18th move. What does he do?
Well, Tal has to give himself some space. He's facing a lot of pressure. Black has two strong bishops.
Right.
And he's controlling this B file. He can bring the rook over.
All right.
So he has to give, and Tal's pieces are not coordinated at all. So he's got to give himself some space. He plays the pawn on A2 to A3, threatening the rook.
Okay. So time for the rook to move. Rook's under attack. So Petrosian plays rook A4. All right. So he brings it over here. He puts more pressure on the pawn on A3. It's attacked. It's actually only attacked once with the rook. We've got the queen and the rook protecting it. All right, so the rook is there. All right, so what does Tal do here?
Well, Tal does another puzzling move.
Yes.
If I saw an open file like this with the queen on it, I would take the F rook and I would push that queen away.
So you bring the rook on F1, bring it over to B1, attack the queen and force the queen off the file.
Right.
And you and I would do the same thing, Marty. Instinctively, we would do that. Okay.
Right.
But
instead, he plays the rook on F to D1.
Yes.
Adding to the attack on the pawn, but it seems a little pointless.
So he looks like he's attacking the pawn. All right. So what Petrosian did in response to that, he in turn plays the queen back to A7. This is rather interesting.
Right.
What's going on here?
And then
well, what does Tal do here after queen A7?
Well, he makes the critical error.
He makes a mistake here.
Yeah, and I don't know.
Now, couldn't he have taken here?
Well, it seems that way.
Yeah, but you know what's wrong with it? Let's show our viewers what's wrong with this quickly as we wrap up the scene. If he had taken knight takes D4, we see bishop takes D4, queen takes D4.
Well, yeah.
Queen takes D4, rook has to take D4, and now the move that's going to be a killer for white is bishop D5.
Right, because that piece is going to be gone.
Right, because now he's pinned.
He's going to double attack.
He's threatening to, it's going to cost him either exchange or a piece.
Right.
Yeah. All right, so that didn't happen. He didn't take the pawn. Let's put this back. All right, so this position here, the queen is still on D3. All right. So in this position, he
plays rook to A2. A little hard to figure out what he was planning, but it's a fatal error.
And this is the losing move.
Right.
Because in response to this move, Petrosian, I don't know how much time he spent on this. He might have actually responded quickly, or probably he took his time saying, what does this move, does he realize what Tal overlooked? Petrosian captured. Rook takes C4, and Tal resigned. Why? Why can't he simply take back the rook?
Because if he takes it, we go back to the problem with this bishop. He's pinned and he loses.
So he plays the bishop D5, and the queen has to move. And wherever the queen moves, this bishop is winning the rook outright.
Right.
It's winning it clear. And at that level of chess, grandmaster chess, they have respect for each other. They don't play on when they're a piece down like that. So amateurs may do that, may continue to play, but the grandmasters do not. Well, this was a 20-move game played at this candidates tournament in the Dutch, the Netherlands Antilles. It enabled Tigran Petrosian to advance, to take on world champion Mikhail Botvinnik, who had dominated chess from 1948, after Alexander Alyekhin died. He died actually, still as world champion. They had a tournament, basically a round-robin tournament to determine who would be the challenger, and Botvinnik was the champion. So, Petrosian did it. He reigned 6 years, only 6 years, but those were 6 very impressive years. He was, again, one of the top players, in fact, one of the greatest chess players that chess has ever seen. And we hope you join us next time when we present another exciting game from the annals of chess. It's a great game. We wish more people would play it. See you next time on Chess Chat.